Hey guys, you ever think about white people? Chat, you ever think about white people? No. I try not to. Absolutely not. Don't exist. Facts. That's terrifying. So I've been over the last little bit, okay? For the last little while, I've actually been thinking about white people a bit. They've been on my mind for some time. All right? The big thing that wanted to make me talk about this was specifically I was watching a little debate. I think it was Vaush's debate with that one giga racist person who's really mad that brown people are allowed to come into the country or whatever. Just stuff like that, right? And I was just thinking to myself, that on top of other stuff that I've seen, I was just thinking to myself, the thing that we talk about a lot, which is how conservatives stoke a lot of fear, and conservatives stoke a lot of culture war cringe, specifically to dupe white people into voting against their own personal interests, really. And some people would say there's whiteness as well, but I would propose something that not too many people talk about here, which is that conservatives hate white people. This is the conclusion that I've had to come to. This is the conclusion that I've had to come to over the last couple of weeks, which is that conservatives just hate white people. Right? Right, chat? It's not something that we talk about that often, but it is true. They are the real anti-white people. They hate men too. They hate men. They hate women. They hate white people because they don't do anything for them. They actively trick white people into believing that voting for them is going to be something good for them. Genuinely. And this isn't anything new, okay? This goes back far. This goes back far, okay? One thing that made me think about this a little while ago was these pair of jeans, okay? They were recently sold. This $76,000 pair of jeans, these real ugly pair of jeans that were made in the late 1800s. And on the inside of the tag, you know how Levi's come with the big inside tag that has a big print on it? On the inside of this tag, it said something about white workers. It was the only, see here, the label on the inside says the only kind made by white labor. Okay? The 100-year-old jorts. Yeah. It's the only kind made by white labor. Now, if we're talking about the 1800s, I feel another group of people's labor was indeed used to make these jeans that were made out of cotton. But on that note, the big reason why they were promoting themselves as the white labor jeans was because they were big on, and we're on a big anti-China ride back during the 1800s. A lot of Chinese people were coming over and were trying to build a life in America, and obviously with being giga racist, a lot of Chinese people were kicked out. Then there was the Chinese exclusion and Chinese immigration laws to limit how many Chinese people could come into the country and everything, right? And so this was made specifically to be oh, it's for white labor, but it's more sinister than that. And typically we'll talk about this in the framing of what this does to people of color, but I would like to talk about this in the framing of what it actually does and has done for white people, right? Because ever since the Revolutionary War in America, and even before the Revolutionary War, where America is trying to come into itself, conservatives have exploited white people for their own personal gain. And what I mean by that is that this goes all the way back to Johnny Appleseed, you know the story Johnny Appleseed and Paul Bunyan and everything, the old wilderness guys, and they got they axe and they got they raccoon hat, and they're going out into the wild and they're doing wacky things, and they don't need no government help, and they're wilderness real men who can live out in the woods and kill the raccoons and cut down the trees and start a fire, and it was the big American spirit thing, right? That myth about Johnny Appleseed, because the Johnny Appleseed guy, he was real, right? He was real. And Johnny Appleseed himself was picked up by, and the story was helped pushed by, you know who? Business leaders and political leaders. Now you may be asking yourself, why in the world would they be picking up somebody like that and like push somebody like that? No, the reason is because they use the same exact story. Yeah, Davy Crockett as well. All of these stories, which were real stories, were pushed and abused by big money for one purpose. And that purpose was to teach the American people and use these stories to fetishize Americans not needing help and your average American not wanting any government assistance or not needing any government assistance or shouldn't have any government assistance because real men, real Americans can do it all by themselves. What they did is they found this man who like all of the legends were tied to, and they had him run for office. Dude could barely read. He didn't know how to tie a tie, but he ran for office as a senator and he made it into the Senate and everything. And a lot of big money was put on his name. Anyways, these stories were picked up, and the reason why is because they really wanted to show the American people that, because one thing that was happening is because in other states, in other nations, their governments were changing and they were moving more towards what our Constitution actually says, which is provide for the general welfare, right? And so governments across the world, especially Europe, which was our sister nations at the time, we're moving more towards the government actually helping the people and helping them do things. But that would mean that there would be increased taxes. And you know who was going to be taxed? Those big businesses. They didn't want to be taxed. They didn't want government money to be used in those ways. They wanted the buyouts. They wanted the bailouts. They wanted government money to be for themselves, and they did not want taxes to be increased. And so they hatched a plan. Once they saw this, business leaders came together and they said, Johnny Appleseed, Davy Crockett, Paul Bunyan, all of these types of things, all these types of stories were heavily pushed, specifically and for the cynical purpose of looking to white people and white labor and telling them they don't need any government help. You shouldn't have any government help because look at them. They're able to do everything all by themselves. Look, it's same thing happened with the settler movement and people moving out west and gold rush. All of these types of things were pushed heavily by big money and private industry. So your average person wouldn't get any help from the government because that means money would have to come out of those big businesses' pockets. And that's the last thing they want. And that's when business had a lot more power than they even do today. We think that we live in like an oligopoly, okay? Back during the time of like Carnegie and Rockefeller and Standard Oil and all that stuff, you can't, and like Ford, right? Listen, okay, we got it pretty bad. We don't have it as bad as like people back then had it, okay? Like you're born, you walk down the street with your with your hoop and stick. All kids love their hoop and stick, okay? If you could afford it, that was the only toy that your parents could afford. And then once you turned 13, that you went to the mine where you lost an arm and then you starved to death on the streets, okay? And that was like all that they had. Yeah, born, get black lung in the mines, die. Right? And they didn't want things to change because if things changed, then money had to come out of their pockets. And so that's why they push these stories. Same when it comes to this tag on the back of these big jeans, which is this was made by white labor. We know right now, today, that immigration does incredible things for our economy, for our country. It helps out native workers because a lot of people who immigrate are able to take up jobs that a lot of us native workers don't really want to take, but still need to be filled. Things like agriculture. They talk about conservatives talk about illegal immigration all the time. Our country would, and I'm not even exaggerating, our country would collapse without immigration. It would collapse. Even without illegal immigration, our country's economy would collapse. Our country's economy is held up by immigration, both legal and illegal. We can talk about it in a moment. But like going back in time a bit, labor, like big labor and white labor has always been abused by conservatives and money to get what they want. Another example of this is back during the big unionization drive, when unions were getting big, when labor was starting to fight back against against big money, when the Pinkertons was around, when there were like riots and like companies had literal private militaries that would go assassinate like union leaders, like that type of stuff. I'm talking like political machines. This type of like crazy stuff was going on back in the day. Okay, crazy stuff. We have like a little tinge of it today, but nowhere near as bad as it was. And the reason was because of these union movements. But union movements back in the day, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, were heavily hampered and gimped by racism that was pushed by big elites. That's the reason why. What would happen is that now that black people weren't literally slaves, black people still had to have jobs, so they went to go have jobs at these big companies and everything. But they weren't allowed in the same unions as a lot of white people were. But when white unions wanted to have like better pay and everything, when they wanted to have safer working conditions, when they wanted to have better hours, they'd strike, okay? And they'd want these things to happen. But the thing was, they wouldn't let black people, Chinese people, Hispanic people into their unions. And so why in the world would any of these people, who make up a large portion of the people who are in industry at the time and today, why in the world would they not cross a picket line and not go into work and feed their families and not keep the business running and not get paid when they weren't going to get any piece of the pie of the union that you put together? Why in the world would they do that? And the thing is, they didn't. And so all those people, women, black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, they cross those picket lines because why the fuck would they stick their neck out for white men who weren't going to have them get any of the pay, get any of the benefits, get any of the time off that was going to happen? So if nothing's going to change for them, why in the world would I sit here and sit shoulder to shoulder with you with your labor movement if the labor movement doesn't include me, even though I am labor? So a lot of those early labor movements failed, and a lot of them continued to fail until they decided until they were able to overcome that. A lot of that racism that was implanted in them. This goes all the way back, okay? All the way back to even the transatlantic slave trade. So the racism that we see here today is a holdover of other moneyed interests that helped create the racism that we see today because of the transatlantic slave trade. It was more ethical to do this to people who are less than human, less than people. And also afterwards, it also helped continue that on because when they looked at these people who haven't recovered since the Great Depression, okay, but even before that, who were incredibly poor, who were incredibly not well off, who were starving, who were dying because of these conditions, who's like husbands and like brothers and uncles and fathers were dying in the mines and dying in factories and having insane injuries and things along those lines and having incredibly shortened lifespans because of what these companies were sapping every single second of life from these people until they were nothing. You know what they told those people, those like poor white people, especially after like the Civil War? They said, you may be poor, you may be starving, you may not have good wages, you may not have a good job, you may not be able to see your kids, you may you may be completely on your own and your family is dying, but at least you're not black. At least you're not one of them. And that carried on for a long time, right? At least you're not one of them. They gave them this illusion of whiteness, this illusion of status, as they took away status from them in real meaningful ways, not racial status, but real status when it comes to being able to feed your family, when it comes to being able to take care of your loved ones, when it comes to all of these things. It was dying. It was literally, they made white people die of whiteness. And there was a book that was actually written not too long ago. It was called Dying of Whiteness. One of the, a lot of conservatives got really mad at it, but if you actually read it and actually decided to be a little smart about it, you would understand what it was about. It was incredibly interesting. One of the most interesting stories about dying of whiteness the author had is they went to, I believe it was Eastern Kentucky. Okay. And you all saw what happened to Eastern Kentucky this year when it came to all the flooding and everything and how devastated they are and how even though they have little, they had little before, they have nothing now. These people, these communities that hadn't recovered, if you take a look at them, it looks like they hadn't recovered since like the Great Depression. I'm not lying to you. Here, let me see if I can show you some pictures, because there was a photographer that actually went to Eastern Kentucky to show some of the poverty that people were living in. These images were not taken. Here, I want to show you some of these. These images were not taken in the like 1800s or early 1900s. Here, let me show you some of these. All right, so this is what Eastern Kentucky looks like. These pictures were taken, if I remember correctly, in the 1960s and 70s. This is how these people live, right? And not to make fun of them or anything. This isn't to make fun of them or like to clown on them. They're genuinely living in complete abject poverty. Complete abject poverty. They literally have to wash their kids in like little buckets, right? And this is what these people experience on a day-to-day basis. This is what their conservative politicians, this is how they left them, right? For a specific reason. They left them here for a specific reason, because they didn't want money to go here. They wanted money to go somewhere else. Money had nothing to do. They took money away from these people. They took futures away from these people. For one reason and one reason only, specifically so they can have more money for themselves. They took food out of these children's mouths for their own personal gain, and they left them with nothing. And they actually left them with less than nothing. They left them with the illusion of, and not saying all of these people are racist or everything. I don't know all of these people, but we can speak generally about like racial attitudes, especially in like the 1960s and how we got here today. Nobody, whether you can agree or disagree with like racism today, we can all agree about racism in the late 1800s and early and late 1900s as well. Let's be honest with ourselves, okay? Let's be honest with ourselves for a moment here. The author of Dying of Whiteness went to these areas and they asked somebody about like Obamacare, okay? Healthcare that these people had like finally gotten, right? Before this, these people did not have healthcare. Before this, these people had like a family doctor that did a lot of work for like free. They did like pro bono work. And if it wasn't pro bono work, they died. Okay. Sorry. You weren't paying for healthcare for like 6 kids when you work in the mines. Okay. That wasn't happening. I'm sorry. And so a lot of these people were able to finally get some real healthcare that wouldn't put them in even worse poverty.
This man is very real.
They talked to this one guy. He was like, why are you against Obamacare, even though it's going to help you? This person had cancer. This person was dying. Okay. And the only way that he was ever going to get any sort of like cancer treatment was specifically through Obamacare and the help that he would be able to get from there. But he said he was against Obamacare because he didn't want the poor people, the people who didn't deserve it, to be able to get that health care. Before the book was finally published, that man died. He died. He died specifically because of an idea that was implanted in him by rich people who don't know and wouldn't care if they knew that man passed away. Or maybe they may even laughing to the bank on this man's grave. They killed him specifically for their own money. Just for not even like a lot, just a little bit of money. That man wouldn't make a lot of money. Let's be honest with ourselves. And there are so many people like this, like around the world. Sorry, there's so many people like this around the country who have suffered because of this. These people who claim to be against wokeness, against BLM or whatever, against like cancel culture, they say they care so much about white people, but where's their care for white people? Where's their care for like the majority of people who are poor, who are white? What about the majority of people who are homeless, white men, if I remember correctly? What about all of that? What about it? Genuinely, were they going to talk about that? Like, here's Lauren Bell. Like, even, they've been using tricks against these people for so long, and even trick them that they're like the most oppressed minority now to hide the ball again. They shift the narrative again to keep out the idea of something that really matters. And what really matters is their future, their children's future. But immigrants aren't harming their future. Black people aren't harming their future. Like, cancel culture isn't harming their future. Wokeness isn't harming their future. They're going to be fine. What's really harming their future is their conservative politicians who are making them scared that there's a taco truck popping up in their local neighborhood while they're running out the back door with their children's future. That's what really matters. And we see this with conservatives today. We saw this with Donald Trump, how he would always drum up fear and always drum up controversy when it came to like the caravan. The caravan was coming. Remember how like Donald Trump has been out of office and they haven't spoken about the caravan in fucking years? Hasn't spoken about the caravan in years. Hasn't come back. It's because it wasn't real and it didn't matter. They hopped onto something else. And now all of the money that they're using, the millions, tens of millions of dollars that they're using to stick it to the Biden administration when it came to like apparently illegal immigrants coming into the country and destroying the country or whatever. All the money they use to send them to Martha's Vineyard, to Obama's home, to Washington, D.C., to New York, to Noir, to like Chicago, to San Francisco, to all of these, to Boston, to all of these places. All of these places, the tens of millions of dollars that they could have been using for actually people who are suffering in their states. They used it for this weird trick. They used it for this weird gimmick to own the libs. And we talked about the suffering that it put onto those people who were used as pawns. But let's talk a little bit about like all the money that could have been used. Conservative governments are literally strangling poor white people in their country, in their states to death. Here in Kentucky, in Mississippi, in Texas, in Florida, in Utah, in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Tennessee, in Georgia, in South Carolina, in all of these states and more. They didn't expand Medicare and Medicaid. People died because of that. They gutted Obamacare benefits. People died because of that. They cut unemployment benefits just for fun, just to force people to go back to work. People died because of that. And the most amount of people that died were white. We talk about how it disproportionately hurts like groups of people. We've talked about that before. But the majority of people who are dying are white. They're perfectly fine putting white people through the meat grinder for their own personal gain. As long as they can screw over certain groups of people, they can pit two groups of people against each other and then throw all of them in the grinder. They'll be happy because at the end of the day, what still gets printed out is money. After these tens of millions of dollars are used for this stunt, it didn't even do anything. We talked about it when it happened. If these people were genuinely illegal aliens, they wouldn't have been sent to another part of the country. They would have been deported. And so now, look at what conservatives are saying now. Look at this. Transported migrants may be on a path to citizenship because of DeSantis's flights. Because of what Abbott were doing, these people are now going to be full American citizens. And Bober's literally losing her mind. The entire immigration system needs to be overhauled. Anyone with the slightest bit of a brain can tell you how ridiculous this is. If you had the option to step up, you didn't. You decided to play games, and now these people are on the path to citizenship. What's wrong with them? People who are immigrants, they work harder than your average American. They take jobs that your average American wouldn't. And they do it all for less pay, for less recognition, and more hate than your average American could ever take. If I'm going to be honest with you. They earn less, they make less, they take less, and they suffer more, but they still complain about it all of the time. For what? For one reason: to stoke fear, to make immigration, to make like race issues a big issue when they're just not. We could be worrying about so many other things. The reason why I don't talk about race, here on the left, we don't talk about race just for fun. It is a reaction. A lot of conservatives have been duped into believing that their ideas about race are reaction. They're not. They're not. You're not countering anything. The counter is like the anti-racist talks and ideas that are being pushed. You're just going back to the default, which was the racism in general. Okay? That was used specifically to screw over white people, mainly for more money. Generally. And that's not saying it doesn't always work out in like the general white population's detriment. I think in total, it works out to their detriment. Net. That doesn't mean like there are some good things that happen. Obviously, redlining helped your average white person more than things like the stymieing of the labor movement did. But this is all real. And one big thing as well on like the massive talks when it comes to immigration and everything. Remember, when it comes to race, has been like they have a new boogeyman that they don't even talk about anymore, like critical race theory, which isn't even taught in schools. Critical race theory is like a Harvard law thing that you teach. They don't even know what critical race theory is. I promise you, ask a conservative what critical race theory is. They will not give you a coherent answer because there is no coherent answer. What critical race theory is are things that people say about race that makes them sad or uncomfortable or they don't like or they don't agree with. That's what critical race theory is. It's like if you ask a conservative what feminism is, and they'll be like, it's somebody who disagrees. Feminist is somebody who disagrees with me, and feminism is things that have to do with like women and society that I disagree with. That's the real answer. But if we talk about this for a moment, when it comes to the BLM thing, BLM was good. I think BLM's good. I have a sign of it up on my wall. But in that debate that I watched, one incredible thing that made me want to talk about this for a moment was how like the low IQ Canadian racist man was like, black people are coming together for their own like personal interests. And that's okay because like racists do that and that's all good and pog, but like white people should do it too. And black people don't care about white people because BLM wasn't about white people. And this is dumb. And this is partly for where like the whole White Lives Matter thing comes on. Conservatives can't say white lives matter. Conservatives don't believe that white lives matter. They never have, and they never will. Rich conservatives, moneyed interest, capitalism does not care about white lives. They never have, they never will, because it's not in moneyed interest to do that. There's a reason why your big conservative think tanks. I'm talking like the really big ones, okay? The ones that you may not even know the names of. The people who you have no clue of. Those billionaires. There's a reason why they're not on Trump's side. And there's a reason why they're not on like the normie conservative side. Because they differentiate when it comes to immigration, because immigration's better for the country, and so they make more money. They like immigration. Ben Shapiro, you don't see Ben Shapiro talking about how bad immigration is all the time because he's a neocon. He loves immigration, right? Because it just makes more money. I like immigration because people should be able to move wherever they want and be able to pick up jobs wherever they want. And if they want to come to America, sick, right? I think that's fine. They love immigration because they can exploit new immigrants for more money because they'll expect worse working conditions and they'll accept less money for the same job even though they deserve more. That's the reason why people like, that's the reason why those big interests love immigration, and that's why the same people who like talk out the side of their neck about how much they hate immigration are also the ones who are always in federal court for illegally hiring illegal immigrants to do work and then paying them under the table. That's the reason why, right? But Black Lives Matter and the push for police reform doesn't just help black people. Black people aren't the only people who are suffering under the police state that we have. This is factual. No matter what, black people don't make up the majority of the people in America. And black people aren't the ones who are mostly stopped by police. Okay? Black people aren't the ones who have the most interactions with police, and black people aren't the ones that have the most, in total, bad interactions with the police either. You know who it is? It's white people. They're the ones who are going to have to come into contact with the police as they are today. These are the people who suffer and die. Where is like the White Lives Matter movement for that one guy who was forced to crawl through a hallway on his hands and knees, given 17 different contradictory commands by police, and when he couldn't follow and he was begging the police not to shoot him, they blew his head off and then they walked away from it? Where is their White Lives Matter march for that? Huh? What about that? What about this guy who was kneeled on to death, just like George Floyd, like similar to what George Floyd was, and died, but the cops were able to get away with it, and the officers were cleared of all charges for the way they treated this man. They're literally stepping on him. They suffocated him to death. Where's their White Lives Matter movement about that guy? Where was that? I want to know. Where was it? Where were any of you? Where were any of you when this San Antonio child who was shot recently? Where's the White Lives Matter movement for that? Where are they? Why aren't they speaking up about any of this? I talk about all of these things. What about the woman who was literally tied to train tracks by the police a couple of weeks ago? This kid who was eating a McDonald's burger in his car, who was shot to death for the crime of having a license plate that didn't match the car. Where is that? And the kid's on life support. I don't know where he is now. It's been 8 days since this story has been updated. I don't know if the kid's still alive. I have no clue. He died? I have no clue if the kid died. I have no clue if he died. He's on life support, and they don't know if he's going to wake up, and they don't know if he's going to be okay. And that's the last time I was able to check up on the story to see what happened. I have no clue if he actually died. If you're talking about the guy who got kneeled on in that grocery store, that guy died. He's dead. That guy's dead. And the way they treat people, and the way they treat people who are suffering with drug addiction. Do I have anybody here who's been to the Midwest, who has family in the Midwest or the South or something, and who struggle? If you know anybody who's in that area, you probably know somebody, or like the Rust Belt even, you probably know somebody, friend or family, who's suffered with drug addiction. It's incredible. And the companies that and the companies that did that to America, that did the opioid pandemic, who literally lied to insurance companies, who lied to doctors to get more and more opiates into the hands of people who did not need them, who shouldn't have them, for more money. You know, the states that were on top of that lawsuit to make them to be held accountable, it wasn't red states. It wasn't those states where the people who are there suffering the most. It is red states who are the ones that are suffering the most. It is red states that have the most casualties from opioid overdoses. It's the red states are the ones that are suffering the most from that. It's red states are the ones that have the highest amount of obesity. It's red states the ones with the highest amount of cancer. It's red states are the states that have to take in the most amount of money in federal aid, because those people in those states are suffering. Some places in the South and Midwest are unironically worse than some places in backwoods poor Africa. I'm not lying to you, because there are E. coli outbreaks. E. coli outbreaks. And there's so many white people around the country who are suffering because of moneyed interest, because of the war on drugs. So many families torn apart. They didn't decide to hold the companies accountable. They decided to hold your average human being accountable for suffering. They made mental illness and they made addiction a crime instead of having these people get help. And this is how they treat people who are suffering. I know people. I've known people. I've dated people who have either a drug addiction or who have family who've had drug addictions. I've known somebody who has family literally on the street in Louisville, and who lost their child because of drug addictions, and nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows where to find them. They're just going to end up dead one day. And the saddest thing about it is that nobody may even know who that body belongs to contact the family. They just may end up as like on like a government owned graveyard with an unmarked grave, and nobody will ever know where whose family they belong to be able to say their final goodbyes. Nobody may know. And these conservatives just don't care, and they continue a cycle of suffering for as long as possible, because the reason why is because it doesn't make money to do so. And on top, they demonize these people. Hunter Biden. Let's talk about Hunter Biden for a second. Somebody who's actively been struggling with a drug addiction for years. You know how conservatives treat Hunter Biden, a white person like Hunter Biden? 2018 audio clip of Biden's voicemail to his son, Hunter Biden. And this is what Biden said to his son, who is struggling with drug addiction. It's Dad. I called to tell you I love you. I love you more than the whole world, pal. You got to get some help. I don't know what to do. I know you don't either. And this was a dunk on Joe Biden. We're not going to be listening to the audio here. I don't want to bring down the mood like even more, but it is really sad. They use this to dunk on, sick burn. Dunking on a guy who's a man who's doing everything he can to help his family through drug addiction. The Bidens are lucky since Joe Biden's been in office for so long. He has money. He can get help. Your average white person does not. Your average white person who suffers from drug addiction suffers until they die. They don't escape. What have they done for those people? Have they helped them escape? Have they helped them get out? Or did they demonize them? Did they call them losers? Did they say that they're weak and that they should be dealt with, that they should be done away with? That's what they said. That's what they said about these people. Not that they're sick and they need help, that they're real people. They made up hoaxes about them. They made up ideas about them. On top of the fact, they were talking about like the people who are most homeless, white people who are getting killed on the street every day because they're deemed as lesser humans. I'm not sure if you know this, but in California is one of the most hostile states to homeless people. And yes, and now we're talking about conservatives. I'm not talking about just Republicans. I'm talking about conservatives, okay? And conservative ideology. They're Democrat conservatives, all right? And I think a lot of people confuse the two. We've talked about this before. The app called Citizen. We did a story about this a little while ago. But the Citizen app, I won't rehash the entire thing. The Citizen app is basically an app that it was like its old name was Vigilante, which tells you exactly what the app was supposed to be for. It's supposed to be to make your average person like their own little cop. It was supposed to make your average person their own like little cop, and they report crimes, and you all can have like a inter-crime vigilante network and everything. The Vigilante CEO really wanted his app to pop off in California, and so when it popped off when he dropped it in California and he dropped it in New York, he helped it grow by doing two things. One thing was working with the actual local government to make it be used as an app where you can track COVID-19 cases and COVID-19 outbreaks. The other thing they did was basically they basically turned crime hunting into a big game. What happened is that a fire broke out in California. California, a fire broke out, as it does, and they thought that it was arson, and arson specifically by a homeless person, because homeless people are incredibly demonized there. So they said it was a homeless person committing arson. What they did was the CEO hopped to action, okay? Because he was mad, because he had money interest, because his second mansion in California was actually in the way of the fire and may even be damaged by the fire. His land may be damaged by the fire. So he was like, we're going to catch this motherfucker who did it. And they got a tip that it was a homeless person. And so what they did was they used the app to literally stream. They made a streaming like news live broadcast service. And the CEO of the app put a bounty on the head of this homeless person. A literal bounty. All right. It started off with $2,000 of his own money, not the company's money, his own money. It was $2,000. And they were streaming the entire night, and they had people call in, and they had people like scouring the streets looking for this homeless guy. And they found a picture. They got a tip of a picture of a homeless guy, and they took the picture and they put it up on screen. And sometimes during that stream on the app, they had 30,000 concurrent viewers with this homeless man's picture up on the stream. Well, they were saying that he's destroying the state. These homeless people are doing crazy shit. They have to be stopped. We have to get this guy. We have to put him in jail. We're upping the bounty. $5,000. The night goes on. There were literally homeless people hunting squads. They were turning over homeless encampments. They were cutting through people's homeless people's tents. They were kicking homeless people's dogs. There were people going on hunting sprees for this homeless person to find out whoever it was who did this, who allegedly did this fire. The night goes on. They up the bounty. The CEO's own money, $10,000 for whoever catches this man. His picture still remains on stream. The night goes on, and they do actually catch him. They find him. They find the guy. They find the homeless man, this white homeless man, who is a part of the picture. But nobody on like the Citizen app found him. The cops found him. And that man was released less than 1 hour after the cops found him, because it was impossible for him to have committed the crime. It was impossible for him to have committed the arson. He was on the complete opposite side of town, asleep, when all of this was going on. And so they did all of this for this one guy and stoked all of this outrage and had all of these people suffer for a lie for their own money. That's what's going on right now. That's what we're experiencing. And while conservatives are trying to lie to white people to say that wokeness or BLM or immigration or whatever is the real culprit behind all of the suffering that America is facing, it's the same thing that it's always been. Moneyed interest. That's the real issue here. And they're hiding the ball. And they always have, and they always will. Homeless people are killed all of the time. White men specifically are like hunted like animals when they're on the street. You should just look at what your average conservative has to say about homeless people. I remember going through in the comment section of a local newspaper article talking about a man who just point blank murdered a homeless man who was just making some soup on the side of the road. He just shot him. He just killed him. He just executed him. The comment section was abhorrent. I'm not going to show it to you, but the comment section was abhorrent. They were like, he's doing more than what the government will do. He's taking out the trash. That guy was probably going to kill somebody anyways. He's hunting them like dogs. We should put them. We should put we should have like a hunting license for these people. They're barely humans. It was genuinely probably one of the scariest comment sections I've seen in my entire life of covering conservatives, of covering the right, of covering my political opponents and everything. It was probably, I think that one was the scariest comment section I've ever seen. What I have to say to these people, these white people, because most of them are white who are suffering like that. Where are conservatives when they talk about the suicide rate? You know, the people who are the most likely to commit suicide in this country, it's not black people. It's not women. It's white men. They're most likely to kill themselves and most likely to successfully kill themselves as well. They're the people who are experiencing the most amount of mental health challenges is white people as well. Where are they talking about that? Whereas if you actually believe that they care about white lives matter, people who are working for disability rights, homeless rights, police reform, healthcare reform, immigration reform, unionization, all of these things are not one group specific. They help the entire nation. What are conservatives doing for white people? Think about that. What are they genuinely doing? What helps your average white family? What helps the white man on the street? What helps the person suffering from a drug addiction? What helps the suicidal young white guy? What helps your average white woman? What helps these people? What helps the people who are in poverty in like the Bible Belt or the Rust Belt? how do they help these people? What do they do? At least people on the left have groups who care. Where are there groups that care? Where is it? I have never seen a conservative tenant union. I have never seen a conservative homeless advocacy union. I have never in my life seen a conservative, specifically a conservative like drug law reform group. Where are they? What are they doing? What are they doing with the money that they're taking from these children's mouths? When you think about that, it all finally starts to come together. They steal white people's future, and they do an Indiana Jones sort of like switcheroo with giving them something that's fake, giving them something that has never had any true meaning outside of its social value, which is simply whiteness. Whiteness won't feed your children. Whiteness won't send them to college. Whiteness won't help your family member or friend get clean. Whiteness won't give you a new job. Whiteness won't bring your job back from it getting shipped overseas. It won't do anything like that for you. Only real power that working people hold will do anything along those lines. But they've taken it from them. And they've forced them to, but they've taken it from a lot of white people. And they've duped them into believing that culture war issues and things along these lines matter. Well, they're stealing food out of their children's mouths. It really is sad. Like, we talk about this all the time, especially how it hurts like minorities, and it absolutely does. But we need to remember that these systems hurt everyone. And the only people that it doesn't are the people who can make money off of it. And I can promise you, your average white person doesn't really. Not as much as you may think. The suffering is universal. The amount is not. But that's the world that they've made. And that's the world that I'm fighting to overcome. None of my political philosophies harm white people. None of my political philosophies are looking forward to the downfall of white people or something, or to make them poor. When I read stories of all these white people being kicked out of, all these people being kicked out of their homes during the pandemic, or losing their jobs, or being laid off, I don't talk about them in the sense of, I don't laugh in glee when I see white people suffering. I don't. Because I don't see white people, I see human beings suffering. On a more like religious level, I see God's children suffering, but on a secular level, I see human beings suffering. Where are conservatives? What have they done? The answer is nothing. Less than nothing. Actively harming. Those are the real enemies. Them and the moneyed interests behind them.